in Iran, you have this, and you do see it online among some of these young Iranians who support the resistance, and they're saying, why isn't Iran, I don't know, bombing Israel or whatever, which it has done and does threaten to do. But this is going to be a long struggle, and some of them get angry at me and say you don't care about the people of Lebanon, and I speak to people in Lebanon every day, multiple people, every single day, and always before the war, during the war, now it's always. I've lived there, as you know, and I have pictures of martyrs of Lebanon in my home, personal friends, and of course, Iranian martyrs. But but this is not something that you just get emotional about and respond to. Iran has a strategy, Hezbollah has a strategy, and they're going to outlast the enemy. And Netanyahu is, of course, going to say that I'm victorious because he's fighting for his survival. But the United States is in trouble because of the economic situation, and it needs this MOU. Doesn't mean that the United States is going to implement the MOU. If you ask me whether I think the MOU will ever come to achieving its ultimate aim, I don't think so. I find it unlikely. But I do think that the Americans don't want another war. Right now, the situation in Ukraine, which we don't have enough time, I suppose, to talk about, that the situation in Ukraine is heating up. And the economic situation is not good. And Iran has shown the upper hand in the region, and Israel is despised across the world. It's not an ideal moment for the United States to wage another war against Iran, and it's not an ideal moment to have the Strait of Hormuz closed, obviously. So Netanyahu does not have all that many cards. Yes, he can kill people, but the damage being done in the long run to his position through the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's military capabilities to enforce its control of the Strait of Hormuz is, in my opinion, enormous.
Yeah. Do you think that the United States is trying to achieve, because many people who are somehow criticizing the Iranian position, they're saying that the United States is trying to achieve whatever they couldn't achieve during the war, by waging a war against Iran. They wanted to achieve the control over the Strait of Hormuz, topple the regime in Iran. But right now, what they're doing with the case of the Strait of Hormuz, which is so important for Donald Trump, every time he's talking about the war, it's all about the Strait of Hormuz. It's all about. You see, before the war started, it was all about the Iranian nuclear program. Today, his main focus is on the Strait of Hormuz and the management, the barrels, how many barrels are getting out and getting in. And this is the way that Donald Trump sees what's going on. But when it comes to the Iranian, how do you see that front? And what would be your response to those people who are criticizing the Iranian sort of position right now?
Well, first of all, when Trump said, he did that social media post and said 19 million barrels or something went out of the Persian Gulf today, or through the Strait of Hormuz today, like a week ago or 5-6 days ago. Almost all of that oil was Iranian oil. So it's not exactly good news for the United States and the empire. But I'm always in this very unfortunate position. It doesn't bother me, but it's an unfortunate position. And I've discussed this with you before. That since in Iranian politics, I don't fall into any category. People from different sides often accuse me of being on the other side. And so I'm often accused of some of being a hardliner, some accuse me of being reformist, and depending on the circumstances. Some say I was a big fan of the JCPOA. I wasn't ever a fan at all. And then supporters of the JCPOA always say I was a hardcore opponent of the JCPOA. I wasn't a hardcore opponent of that either. But anyway, I just say my opinion, and my opinion is my own, and doesn't carry any weight. So, but in my opinion, both in Iran, there is a division in Iran about the way forward. And I could tell you a story, but we don't have enough time about something that happened to me in this regard. But a funny story. But in Iran, there's a debate about how to move forward, and some are very critical of the MOU and say that we should take a much harder position, and some are saying we should pursue this course of action. Both sides have logical arguments to make, and sometimes, but both of them also say things that don't make sense to me in defense of their positions. But in any case, the course of action that Iran has taken is this MOU, and this MOU, no one in Iran believes is ever going to be enforced by the other side. But the Iranians have been saying from the beginning, and we discussed it from at the very start, that the Iranians are not going to enforce the MOU if the other side doesn't. And this is the difference between now and the JCPOA. In the JCPOA, we carried out our obligations, and the other side didn't. Obama refrained from doing so. Here, the other side doesn't. We don't. We saw just today a ship hit. A couple of days ago, another ship hit. You don't abide by our regulations to go through the Strait of Hormuz, you get hurt. That's how it is. We're at war. This is a ceasefire. The other side is not carrying out its side of the bargain. We're not going to carry out our side of the bargain. They go halfway. We go halfway. They carry out their side of the bargain. We carry out our side of the bargain. So that's how it's going to be. And as long as Lebanon is like this, as long as other aspects of the deal are not implemented, Iran is going to continue to do this. Now, Iran can lob a few missiles at Israel to make some people feel better, but the Iranians feel that what they're doing now is hurting the United States far more than a couple of missiles lobbed at the Israeli regime. And what is this? What is the Iranian plan? The Iranian plan is to create a divide between Trump and those who are worried about the future of the US economy, and Israel and Netanyahu. Now, how successful are they? But that has been the objective ever since October the 7th for the resistance, to create a divide between the Israeli regime and the West. And I think they've succeeded in many ways. The Israeli regime is despised now. The Israeli regime is seen as a burden. The Israeli regime is not seen as an asset. And now, it's genocidal, but now it's causing an economic crisis for the United States. So the Iranians want to keep up the pressure to have Trump, to push Trump to put pressure on Israel. Now, some people would say, no, this is just good cop, bad cop. And anyway, in any case, the United States is in serious trouble. Trump himself said we only have 4 weeks of supplies left. Now, the energy going through the Strait of Hormuz today is more than before, but it's still not normal. So as we speak, the shortages are increasing, not increasing at the pace they were a couple of weeks ago before the signing of the agreement, but they're still increasing. Why? Partially because of the war and all that, but partially because the Iranians are not allowing the ships to flow through as fast as the Americans want. Why is Iran preventing that? Because the Americans are not abiding by their side of the bargain. So in general, while one could make criticisms of the current policies, and I consider some of them to be valid, but also one has to take into account that Iran also needs to export oil too. Iran, in order to support the resistance. I mean, at the end of the day, who supports the resistance in Palestine? Are they getting are there tunnels being made for free, or are all the resources that they need, like in the Gazan economy? Of course not. Iran helps them with great difficulty, by the way, and through paying off lots of middlemen to do it in across the Red Sea and Egypt and so on. So in order to help Yemen, in order to help Gaza, in order to help the West Bank, in order to help Lebanon, and of course, in order to strengthen the Iranian economy, Iran has to be able to sustain itself too. So Iran has to do a balancing act throughout. It has to aid its partners, and it has to weaken its adversary in the best way, in the most effective way possible. The most effective way possible is through the Strait of Hormuz. Not because Iran has some obsession with cutting off trade, because the Americans are not carrying out their side of the bargain. If they did, and the Israeli regime withdrew, stopped killing, left the Lebanese people alone, and then ended the slaughter in Gaza, went to that yellow line betrayal that regional regimes did with Trump, but at least go back to that line and stop the killing. And of course, if they carried out their other obligations, like releasing Iranian assets and so on. So this is, I think, the most effective way to put pressure on Netanyahu through the United States.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of what I said got cut off.
No, I heard you. Here is a report on Wall Street Journal. It says Iran hit U.S. Gulf bases so hard that Washington is considering relocating them. And they're talking about moving them further west. It means that one of the location is going to be Israel. I'm sure that it seems that Jordan or Israel are the options for the United States to relocate or to move their bases there. And is there any sort of communication? We know that there are communications between Iran and Saudi Arabia, between Iran and Qatari government. These are the two important players in the region. And what is the sort of policies or the sort of talks between the two sides, Iranians and GCC countries, about the American bases in the region?
Well, I don't know the details of their communications. What I do know is that Iran is having one-on-one negotiations with all 5 countries. I do know that they've made progress with the Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And that's why these 3 countries were not bombed during the last few weeks when the Americans would violate the ceasefire and strike Iran. Iran would strike back at Kuwait and Bahrain. And on the last occasion, they hit Jordan very hard. Why? Because these 3 countries, American bases in these countries, these 3 countries, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Qatar, shifted their politics. Of course, the statement that we saw yesterday was, of course, very negative. But in their actions towards Iran, there has been some change. And some have been explained to me, some obviously I wouldn't know about. But for example, the Emiratis have told the Iranians that the Israelis are trying very hard to disrupt any rapprochement between Iran and the Emirates. The Emirates themselves said that, senior officials. And they even said, I don't know about believe, but they said to the Iranians that the announcement that Netanyahu went to the Emirates came at a time when the Emirates were trying to improve relations with Iran, and they were claiming that it did not take place. And I'm not saying they're honest or not, but they were saying that this was announced to disrupt the relationship between the negotiations that were going on between Iran and the Emirates. Now, some would say that this had to do with internal Israeli politics, whatever, but that's what some senior Emirati officials have claimed. But in any case, the Iranians don't want war with these countries. The Iranians want the Persian Gulf region to be stable. That's where there's a lot of wealth in the Persian Gulf. And if these countries refrain from assisting the United States in attacking Iran, obviously the relationship will improve. Now, I think the Americans will have to leave anyway because Iranian drones and missiles have shown that those bases cannot be defended, and with the new technologies, it's just not possible. See, and I don't think they can keep them in Jordan either. They want to move all their bases to Israel. I'm not sure that's a smart move either. But in any case, I don't think that in the future, in the long term, the United States will keep their bases here, and I don't think the countries in the Persian Gulf region want them here anymore because they've seen that their cooperation with the United States over attacking Iran has hurt them much more than it's hurt Iran.
We had the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte talking about how Europeans participated in the war against Iran, in the Ramadan war. So he said, based on what he said on Fox News, and 4,000 to 5,000 attacks were, the United States used the American bases in Europe to attack Iran 4,000 to 5,000 times, and he mentioned that more than 500 times they used the bases in Italy, which the Italy government later on came out, the Italian government came out and said that wasn't the case. And I think the problems between Iran and Europeans is getting deeper. We had the snapback sanctions. Right now, their participation, their cooperation in the war against Iran, which they were not part of the war, basically, because they said that we're condemned, we were not part of this. We thought that they're helping the United States to defend Israel during the war, or they're giving the intelligence to the United States, the defensive capabilities to improve Israel and Americans. But you see coming out, and the Secretary General of NATO coming out and saying that we have been participating, cooperating with the United States with the attacks on Iran. What does that mean for Iran? And we had the reaction from the spokesperson of the Iranian Foreign Ministry. And what is your understanding of Iran when it comes to Europe?
Well, first of all, it's obvious why he said it. He was busy licking Trump's boots. And so he wanted to say that, Europe is, that NATO is cooperating. You need NATO. We have to be together. Look, they're spending more money on defense. It's all because of you and, the great leader and all that. So that's one aspect of it. But Europe is becoming increasingly irrelevant to Iran. And I mentioned something earlier about the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine for Iran has been very important for the last 4 or 5 years. Iran took the political and moral decision to side with the Russians. And there was a lot of debate in Iran. And I was one of the people who said we should support Russia. And over time, I think people have come to agree that this was the right policy. A lot of liberals were opposed to this. It was a pretty harsh debate, actually, some very harsh debates on this issue. And in my opinion, the coup and the killing of ethnic Russians and the supporting these neo-Nazis, whatever you argue, however you frame this, NATO does not come out good, and the United States does not come out good in all this. So Iran supported Russia. Also, and another reason was because NATO wanted to expand, and the United States and the West wanted to expand NATO, and that would include Georgia. It was Ukraine and Georgia. And then, of course, right below Georgia is Azerbaijan and Armenia. And Turkey is already NATO. And Erdogan, in the last 20 years, he's never moved to leave NATO. He's a part of NATO. He's a part of the Western camp. And he's done a lot of, he's helped Trump a great deal. Trump has always spoken highly of how he's helped him. So we can't say that Turkey is the government of Turkey is trustworthy. So obviously, it's not in Iran's interest to have NATO expand further. Then you'd have Turkey and then Georgia and then Ukraine, and then later on Azerbaijan and Armenia. Not exactly an ideal situation for Iran. So it was in Iran's interest not to support the Russians. And that has, of course, strengthened Iran's hand in this war. And the Iranians and the Russians are basically, the West is carrying out two wars simultaneously, one against Russia and one against Iran and the axis of resistance. And Europe, as a result of all these stupid and foolish policies, has been severely weakened over the past few years. The energy crisis, the deindustrialization. There are many ills. I mean, look at the approval ratings of the Chancellor of Germany, the President of France, and the now resigned Prime Minister of the UK. It's reflective of the situation in broader Europe. It's getting worse and worse. I said this on multiple occasions during the negotiations to Europeans that Europe. Winter is coming for the Europeans. You've cut off your ties with the Russians. You need us, and they scoffed and laughed. Well, now look, their crisis is just growing by the day. The West also is going to have a problem with Russia in the months ahead because they're basically waging war against Russia now, and they want to expand the drone program against Russia. And Russia is going to respond. With Europe basically declaring war on Russia, Russia is going to hit back harder against Europe. So the intensification of that conflict is only going to weaken the West further. The West is overstretched, and also they want to contain China, and good luck with that. They're failing in West Asia. They're emptying their pockets, they're destroying their resources, their ammunition. Europe, of course, Joseph Borrell once said that Europe is a garden and the rest of the world, meaning us, we're the jungle. And sometimes the garden has to go out to the jungle. So maybe those airstrikes that the Americans were carrying out, those planes went to the garden, got their bombs, flew to the jungle, and killed our kids. That's basically that's what they mean by the garden and the jungle. That our kids deserve to die, like in Lebanon, like in Gaza, and they can live in their garden and enjoy themselves. But that garden is falling apart, Nima. That garden is falling apart. The situation in Germany is not good. The situation across Europe is not good, and it's going to get worse. And with intensification of the war with Russia, it's going to get even worse because I don't think the Russians are going to carry on with business as usual. In fact, the Russians have been saying that the Iranians have done the right thing. When these countries in the Persian space and bases in their countries and their territory to attack Iran, Iran struck back at them. Why? Because they're complicit. What the Russians are now saying is that the West, which is providing the Ukrainians with all these armaments to attack us, and basically saying, like the British now giving missiles, they are part of the war. Now, perhaps this is so that we should strike them now. That's the argument that's now being made in Russia, that we should strike those assets in Europe that are facilitating death and destruction in Russia. Now, the logic may not be as strong as the logic that Iran has to strike Kuwait and Qatar and these countries from which planes are coming and missiles are coming. But it is a strong logic in that these countries are a part of the war. They are providing missiles, they're providing drones, they've set up factories, and then they're a part of this war, and they're planning to intensify it. So they are going to stir up more trouble with Russia. Russia is definitely going to push back, and they're really in no position to hurt Iran. And the time will come when they need Iran, and Iran will remind them that you helped the United States bomb our kids.